She isn't waiting, not for a man, not for approval, not for society to understand her. She walks alone, not because she's been left behind, but because she's finally choosing her own direction. Carl Jung called this the path of individuation, the journey where a person moves beyond the roles the world hands them and begins to meet the self. For many women, this journey begins when the noise of others fades and the silence of solitude begins to speak. Alone, she's not less, she's more connected to her instincts, more honest with her feelings, more awake to the voice within that once got drowned in obligation. In solitude, a woman doesn't lose herself. She finds the parts that were never allowed to exist. She becomes whole, not because someone completed her, but because she stopped being divided. You see, the world fears a woman who lives alone, not because she's lonely, but because she's free. And freedom in a woman has always been mistaken for rebellion. But it's not rebellion, it's return. A return to who she really is. What if a woman living alone wasn't something to be pitied, but something to be understood deeply and fully? What if solitude wasn't a lack of something, but the discovery of everything she was never taught to claim? In a world that constantly defines women by their relationships, by who they love, serve, raise, or support, the idea of a woman who lives alone without a man remains unsettling to many, but not to Carl Jung. To Jung, a woman alone may be closer to her full power than most would dare to realize. He believed that solitude, intentional solitude, was not just silence, it was transformation. A woman alone is not a woman broken. She is not empty. She is not in waiting. She is not a temporary version of something more complete. She is whole, because she has chosen to live from within rather than constantly chasing completion outside herself. In Jungian psychology, there is a concept known as individuation, the process by which a person integrates all parts of their being, the conscious and unconscious, the shadow and the light, the persona and the truth beneath it. For many women, individuation begins the moment she steps away from the roles that society hands her, the moment she questions the idea that she must belong to someone else in order to belong to herself. Living alone, in this sense, is not just a lifestyle. It is a sacred initiation, a chance to hear her own voice without it being drowned in noise. A chance to make choices not out of fear, pressure, or tradition, but out of clarity and alignment. A woman who lives without a man is not denying love. She is not rejecting connection, but she is no longer willing to lose herself in pursuit of it. She would rather sit in silence with herself than fill the room with something that numbs her soul. And that terrifies people, because a woman who needs nothing can no longer be controlled. She no longer serves the structures that kept her small. She is no longer building her life around being chosen. She is choosing herself, and in that act, she is awakening a power far greater than approval. Society often labels these women as too much or too little. Too strong, too soft, too masculine, too damaged, too picky, too independent. But these are just projections, shadows of a culture that cannot fathom a woman who is full without a romantic storyline. And yet, many women today are stepping into that reality. Not because they gave up on love, but because they stopped needing love to be shaped like someone else. They started finding it in the mirror, in their own breath, in their morning routines, in the peace of not explaining themselves, in the freedom of not being edited by someone else's expectations. Jung believed in the archetypes that live within each of us: the mother, the maiden, the sage, the lover, the warrior, the mystic. And when a woman lives alone, something powerful begins to happen. She stops performing one archetype and starts embodying all of them. She becomes multi-dimensional. She learns to mother herself, to nurture her wounds, to bring herself peace in the night. She connects with the mystic within, tuning into inner wisdom, rather than constantly seeking outside validation. She becomes the warrior, handling her life with fierce autonomy. She even rediscovers the maiden, not as knave, but as a woman who can still play, still dream, still dance even when no one is watching. This doesn't mean she has no longing. It doesn't mean she never feels lonely. But she has stopped confusing loneliness with emptiness. She understands that solitude is a room with a view, not a prison cell. And in that room, she writes her own story. She creates her own rhythms. She begins to trust her own timing. There are no external clocks, no social timelines. She lives in alignment with her inner seasons. Some days bloom, others retreat, but it is hers. And that ownership of her space, her voice, her pace, is the root of deep psychological freedom. So many women spend their lives being split between what they feel and what they're allowed to show. Split between who they are and who they were told to be. Split between needing someone and being ashamed of that need. But a woman who lives alone begins to gather those pieces back. She stops performing wholeness and starts practicing it. She stops hiding her chaos and learns to sit with it, shape it, and soften it. Not for anyone else, but for herself. Because she is the witness and the healer, the student and the teacher, the question and the answer. To the outside world, her life might seem quiet. But inside, it is full of movement. She is growing through every thought, every choice, every boundary kept. Every night she chooses herself over temporary comfort. Her solitude becomes the soil where real growth happens. She's not trying to impress anyone. She's not rehearsing a version of herself for some future partner. She is here now with herself. And that presence, that grounded, real, conscious presence, is what makes her magnetic. Paradoxically, the more at peace she becomes alone, the more deeply she will attract connection that's real. Not rushed, not rooted in fear, not built on fantasy. But she's not living for that. She's not waiting for it. She's not shaping her worth around what may or may not come. She is building her life as if she's already whole, because she is. Carl Jung warned of the danger of living only as a persona, a mask we wear to be accepted by society, and many women lose years behind that mask. They smile when they're hurting. They caretake when they're depleted. They say yes when every cell in their body says no. But when a woman lives alone, she begins to drop the mask. Slowly at first, carefully, sometimes painfully, but she begins to breathe again. She begins to notice the subtle truth that was always there, beneath the noise. The things she wants, the people who drain her, the dreams she buried, the beliefs that were never hers, and once she sees them, she can no longer pretend. That's the beginning of freedom. And freedom, real freedom, is never loud. It is steady. It is sacred. People often ask, "Don't you want someone?" As if someone is the goal. But she smiles, because she understands something deeper. It's not about wanting someone. It's about wanting something true. A connection that honors her, not one that empties her. A presence that amplifies, not erases. And she won't trade her peace for anything less. She knows now that being with someone is not the same as being seen. That being held is not the same as being heard. That comfort is not the same as connection. She's not bitter, she's awake. And that awareness is the fire that keeps her warm at night. In Jungian terms, this woman has begun to balance her inner masculine and feminine. She no longer searches for a man to provide what she hasn't found in herself. She has integrated both the nurturing softness and the strong container. She can hold herself through grief and celebration. She can take action without losing sensitivity. She can be disciplined without becoming numb. She is no longer a half waiting to be filled. She is a full vessel, and from that fullness, anything she chooses to give is sacred, because it comes from overflow, not lack. This is not the story we were told. We were told that love is the destination, that partnership is the prize, that solitude is the absence of joy. But Carl Jung challenged us to go deeper, to see that true healing begins when we stop outsourcing our identity, when we stop giving away our center, when we stop fearing the quiet places where truth begins to speak. So yes, the woman who lives alone without a man might unsettle people. She doesn't fit the old molds. She isn't easy to define. But she isn't here to be defined. She's here to be real. And in that reality, raw, beautiful, imperfect, she becomes a mirror, not of what others want her to be, but of what they have forgotten in themselves. She lives alone, but she is never alone. She walks with her ancestors. She speaks with her soul. She builds altars of self-respect. She cooks meals seasoned with gratitude. She laughs with the wind. She dances with the unknown. She cries when she needs to and does not apologize for it. She is woman, unowned, untamed, undiminished. And in her solitude, she is finally seen by the one who matters most, herself. And when you begin to understand the depth of this woman's solitude, not just as physical space, but as emotional sovereignty, you realize something powerful. She is rewriting the narrative. No longer is a woman's worth tied to how well she is loved by another. No longer does her story climax with marriage, or children, or approval. Her story continues, deepens, and expands even in the quiet chapters. She is not incomplete, she is unbound, and with every morning she wakes up alone. Every evening she lights a candle just for herself. She sends a silent message into the world, I am enough. This kind of inner knowing doesn't happen overnight. It is earned through seasons of self-doubt, of peeling away false selves, of sitting with the ache of being misunderstood. But over time, the ache softens. It becomes a kind of music, a background rhythm reminding her of her strength. She learns to trust the wisdom of her body, the whispers of her intuition. She doesn't need permission to rest. She doesn't ask for validation to dream. She becomes both the architect and the sanctuary. And perhaps that's why society struggles to understand her. Because she refuses to be built around someone else's blueprint. Carl Jung spoke often about shadow work, the idea that within all of us lay disowned parts, pieces we have exiled because they were deemed unacceptable. A woman who lives alone often comes face to face with her shadow. She sees the neediness, the anger, the fear, the longing. But she doesn't run. She doesn't shame herself. She invites those parts in, sits with them, and asks what they need. And slowly, she integrates. She heals not by escaping her darkness, but by illuminating it. That is where true power lies, not in pretending to be perfect, but in embracing every layer of her humanity. Some may wonder if she's hiding, if she's built walls, if she's given up. But she knows the truth. She is not hiding, she is healing. She is not building walls, she is building boundaries. She has not given up, she has finally begun. For the first time, she's not performing for the outside world. She's not curating herself for consumption. She's not bending into shapes to be digestible. She's standing solid, rooted and whole, without apology. And in doing so, she becomes an invitation for other women to do the same. What makes this path revolutionary is not its loudness, but its clarity. She no longer seeks chaos and calls it passion. She doesn't mistake control for safety. She doesn't confuse attention with love. She has tasted quiet, and she has found it nourishing. She is not rushing to fill the silence. She is listening to what it reveals. And in those revelations, she finds her own soul speaking, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in roars, but always, always truthfully. When a woman lives alone, she often learns how to do everything herself. Hang curtains, fix sinks, pay bills, navigate emergencies. And yes, these things build independence. But there is something deeper than the logistics. There is dignity. There is grace. There is the soft confidence that comes from knowing she can take care of herself, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. That if someone comes into her life, it will not be out of need, it will be out of resonance. Shared energy, not dependency. Mutual respect, not hierarchy. Jung taught that we must each make the unconscious conscious, or else it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. Many women are waking up to this now. They are realizing how much of their lives have been ruled by unconscious conditioning. Taught to please, to be quiet, to be nice, to be small. But when she is alone, a woman begins to see those patterns, and she starts to break them. Not with fury, but with focus. Not with rebellion, but with reclamation. She starts choosing differently, eating differently, speaking differently, dreaming differently, and every choice becomes an act of self-respect. There are moments when it hurts, when she wishes someone would wrap arms around her and say, "You don't have to do this alone." But even then, she breathes. She lets the feeling pass. She writes, prays, meditates, or simply lets the tears fall. Because she knows now, pain is not the enemy, it is a passage, and she is no longer afraid of her own depths. She does not need to be rescued. She has become her own anchor, her own lighthouse, her own safe return. And as time passes, she no longer seeks to prove her worth. She no longer debates with those who do not understand. She is not defensive. She is not offended. She simply walks on, carrying a quiet flame inside her. That flame is not rage. It is not pride. It is self-possession. And it burns brighter than any approval could ever offer. Because it comes from within, and what comes from within cannot be taken away. Somewhere along the way, this woman becomes magnetic, not because she is trying to be, but because people can feel her presence. She does not chase, she does not cling. She is rooted, and roots have their own gravity. The right souls are drawn to her, not because she needs them, but because she mirrors a part of them they've forgotten. And when love comes, if it comes, it will be met with open eyes and a full heart. Not desperation, but devotion. Not fantasy, but truth. Jung believed that every soul has its own path to walk. And sometimes, solitude is not a detour. It is the path itself. A woman alone is not outside of life. She is inside it in ways many never touch. She sees herself clearly. She chooses from clarity, and in doing so, she gives the world something rare, a woman not shaped by fear, but by freedom. So when you see her walking alone, sitting at a cafe with a book, tending her garden, working late by choice, laughing at her own jokes, decorating her space with colors that make her feel alive, know that you are witnessing a rare kind of woman. A woman who dared to be with herself long enough to fall in love with what she found. A woman who has stopped shrinking. A woman who will no longer disappear in exchange for company. She is not alone because she has no one. She is alone because she became someone. There is a kind of beauty in her life that cannot be captured on a social feed. It's quiet. It's subtle. It shows up in the way she sets the table for one and still lights a candle. In the way she walks into a room with presence, not needing to perform. In how she answers questions without shrinking, how she disagrees without apologizing, how she sits with silence without needing to fill it. She is not trying to be mysterious. She has simply become whole, and wholeness carries its own mystery. This woman doesn't walk the path that others paved for her. She walks the one she's had to carve out with her own hands, her own tears, her own healing. Every scar she carries tells a story, not of defeat, but of resurrection. She has come back to herself again and again, even when it would have been easier to lose herself in someone else's story. That is courage. That is strength. That is the work of the soul. In Jungian terms, this is the return to the self, the central archetype that represents the totality of who we are. When a woman lives alone and does this inner work, she stops outsourcing her identity. She stops borrowing her worth. She becomes anchored. Her femininity is no longer defined by how soft or pleasing she is. Her value is no longer measured by how well she performs in a relationship. She is feminine in her wisdom, in her grounded intuition, in her ability to be both open and discerning, to nurture without losing herself, to give without draining, to love without disappearing. This journey, though often romanticized, is not always easy. There are days when the silence is heavy, when the absence of another presence is deeply felt. But even in those moments, she does not abandon herself. She doesn't numb the ache. She meets it with compassion, and in doing so, she becomes her own sanctuary, a place she can come home to again and again. She does not need to be perfect. She just needs to be real. And perhaps this is what makes her so rare. She doesn't need to prove her independence. She simply lives it. She doesn't shout her worth. She embodies it. Her solitude is not an act of rebellion. It's a practice of reverence. She is not proving a point. She is living her truth. And in a world that profits off of women feeling not enough, her self-acceptance is a radical act. She is not hardened. She is not guarded. She is soft where she chooses to be, strong where she needs to be. She has learned that boundaries are a form of love, and that saying no to what drains her is a yes to everything sacred. She is no longer afraid of being misunderstood. She no longer needs everyone to agree. She has outgrown the need for constant reassurance. Now, she trusts herself. She knows what she knows, and that's enough. There is something holy in her presence. Not religious, not performative, but deeply spiritual. Because she has walked through the fire and came out not burned, but reborn. She has faced the shadow and come out with light. She has lived through loss and learned how to stay open. She has stopped trying to control the timing of her life. Instead, she surrenders, not in weakness, but in wisdom, because she knows what is meant for her will never require her to abandon herself. In the end, this woman is not defined by her relationship status. She is not a phase or a passing rebellion, or someone just waiting to be loved right. She is the one doing the loving, loving herself, loving her solitude, loving the world in ways that are quiet and unseen. She is not alone because she failed to be chosen. She is alone because she finally chose herself. And that choice, the choice to be alone, to live by your own rhythm, to stay rooted in your own truth, is not selfish, it's sacred. Because when a woman truly belongs to herself, she no longer fits into systems that ask her to shrink. She outgrows the cages built for her comfort. She rises, and in that rising, she calls other women forward, not with noise, not with force, but with presence. Carl Jung believed that the deepest work of our lives is to become who we truly are, not who we were told to be, not who we needed to be in order to be loved, but who we are, whole, integrated, conscious. This woman, the one who lives alone, who walks her path quietly but firmly, who has stopped performing and started being. She is doing that work every single day. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most radical truth of all. She is not lonely. She is luminous. She is not waiting. She is arriving, again and again, into the fullness of her being.